Hey, what is up, everybody? So this week we have a great matchup. Packers versus Texans at Lambeau Fields. Can't believe we're already to week 7. A third of the season is already over, which is pretty surprising. It's going by a little too fast. But when we look at this Packers team right now, after 6 weeks, sitting at 4-2, thinking back to the start of the season, after the Packers lose to the Philadelphia Eagles week 1, Jordan Love, it's uncertain as to how long he'll be out. It comes out maybe 3 to 6 weeks. And at that point, when you're 0-1, your quarterback who you just paid $55 million a year is going down, and now you're sitting there basically trying to figure out what's happening next. There are a lot of ways this could have gone down for the Packers and the Packers team. And so now, basically 5-6 weeks later from that point, the fact that the Packers are sitting at 4-2 after starting the way they did with all that uncertainty, I feel pretty confident and pretty good about where this Packers team is at right now. With Jordan Love now about to play in his, fourth straight game after suffering his MCL sprain, with the defense finally starting to get into rhythm. A lot of the rookies starting to play well. The Packers, I think, are in a very, very good spot. And that's what makes this game on Sunday, I'd say, one of the best games, if not the best game of the week. There's a few other good ones. I think the 49ers play the the Chiefs. That's what I'm thinking of. But I'm surprised this game isn't like a primetime game. It's at noon. So that's interesting. But these are two quarterbacks, Jordan Love and CJ Stroud. It almost feels like they're in the same draft class. Obviously, they're not, but they both started last year for the first time, or taking over as a starting quarterback. Of course, Jordan Love did have that one start earlier in his career when Aaron Rodgers went down. But these guys have, we've gotten to witness both of them in their first season starting last year, now into this season. And I think they've both ascended to, top 10 quarterback status. They're both playing at that level. And when we look at the Packers offense right now, no doubt they're easily one of the best offenses in the league. Had a very big day against the Cardinals last week. That's not saying much. The Cardinals do have, I'd say, one of the worst defenses in the NFL. But to see Jordan Love come in, 258 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception. Wasn't really his fault. Bo Melton fell down because of that. He threw the pick. 119.5 passer rating. So I think it was Jordan Love's best day of the season, and it looks like he's really gotten over that MCL sprain, where in the first game, when he came back against the Vikings, clearly he wasn't at his full health. The Vikings are sending tons of blitzes, and I think since that point, Jordan Love is playing at a much higher level than he was a few weeks ago. When we look at this Texans defense, they have a pretty solid defense. They're 16th in scoring defense overall, pretty average there. But they are 3rd in total yards allowed, 4th in yards per play allowed. The one problem for the Texans is they are dealing with a lot of injuries on the defensive side of the ball, which are going to impact this game in a big way. It came out here from Packers Wire. It says here, quote, according to Aaron Wilson of KPRC2 in Houston, the Texans are not expected to have cornerback Kamari Lassiter shoulder or safety Jimmy Ward groin for a second straight game on Sunday. And linebackers Aziz Al-Shair knee and Henry To'o concussion didn't practice on Wednesday after suffering injuries last week. Defensive tackle Lorenzo Fatukazi also didn't practice on Wednesday. And so those first two guys I mentioned, Lassiter, who's a rookie, second rounder, and safety Jimmy Ward, they've been two of the reasons that this Texans defense, has been able to be as good as they have against when it comes to the pass. 2 starters on that defense who look like they're not going to be playing this week. And so when you look at some of these stats, they are going to have some backups in there which could, shift this game. But here we are. Through the first 6 weeks for the Texans, they're the 4th best pass defense in the league in yards allowed. They have the 4th fewest pass yards per play allowed. Derek Stingley is a very, very good corner. They have the 9th best opponent passer rating allowed. They have the quarterbacks facing the Texans defense have the worst completion percentage in the NFL at 53%. And back in week 5 when they faced off against Josh Allen, he went 9 for 30, 131 yards, 1 touchdown, and 0 interceptions. So this is a secondary that has been very, very good. I do think it's going to look different without some of their, without some of their starters on the defensive side of the ball. But I think that when you look at this Packers offense, they're really starting to play, at a very, very high level. And if Jordan Love continues to play like he did last week, if they continue to, spread the ball around as has been the norm here with all the receivers, the young receivers the Packers have here the past 2 seasons. I still think the Packers can take advantage in a big way. Jordan Love is one of the best quarterbacks in the league. He's pretty fearless when it comes to some of these passes he'll throw, like that one ball to Jaden Reed against the Rams. He sort of just threw it up there into triple coverage, and it ended up perfectly in Jaden Reed's hands. He put some balls up there where you're like, oh gosh, this could go south, and then sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. I think we're seeing a little bit less of those bad decisions as Jordan Love plays more and more, but it's definitely a good test against a very, very good secondary. It definitely helps that the Packers now have a lot of their receivers back. Wicks went down with a shoulder injury. It looks like he should probably be back. He did miss, the rest of the game after it went down on Sunday. But when we look at the biggest weakness on this Texans defense, it is definitely their running defense. So right now, currently they're 20th in rush yards allowed per game at 113.8. They are 17th in rush yards allowed per carry at 4.6 yards allowed per carry. And the Packers' rushing attack has been one of the best in the NFL. Second in rush yards per game at 167.2. And they have the 6th most rush yards per play at 5.1. And so when you're a quarterback like Jordan Love, any quarterback in the NFL, when you have a running game, it just takes a lot of pressure off of you. It opens things up a lot more in the play action game. You look at the Dallas Cowboys, they have one of the worst rushing attacks right now, and I think it's really hurting what they can do and even hurting Dak Prescott as a passer because, when teams know you can't run the ball, it does make it that much harder. So the Packers' rushing attack has been phenomenal so far this year. And when we look to last year in the Packers' backfield, early in the season when Aaron Jones went down, the Packers' rushing attack really struggled with A.J. Dillon being the main guy. But so far this season, luckily, Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson have stayed healthy. And Josh Jacobs has played really well. 5th most rush yards in the NFL. 4.3 yards a carry, which is 28th in the league. He's getting a ton of carries, though. And he's 19th in rush yards after contact per carry. But I think not necessarily the biggest surprise, but the one thing that's been really awesome to see is how good Emmanuel Wilson has been as a second running back. He's been a guy that I've liked for a while now, since last season in the preseason. And unfortunately, he just didn't really get a ton of carries during last season, dealt with an injury. But so far this year, he has been really good. He's been even more efficient than Josh Jacobs overall. Of course, he doesn't have the same workload, but he is 15th in rush yards per carry, running at 5 yards a carry, which is awesome. And he's 12th in rush yards after contact per attempt. So nearly a top 10 running back when it comes to rush yards after contact. And so we've really seen Emmanuel Wilson step up. And so when you have Josh Jacobs, he's going to take a breather from time to time. And the Packers have always been a team that want to, not give one running back the whole load, sort of keep the other guy healthy. And so when you have Emmanuel Wilson coming in and playing at a near identical, if not slightly better level than Josh Jacobs, that just keeps this offense moving consistently. And so that's been something that's great to see. And so I think the Packers will be able to run the ball somewhat efficiently against this Texans defense, where it hasn't really been one of their strengths. Now, where the Texans do have one strong part of this Texans defense is their pass rush. I would say they have one of the best, if not the best, pass rush edge rusher duos in the NFL in Danielle Hunter and Will Anderson Jr. Currently, Danielle Hunter, who of course was on the Vikings last year, came to the Texans this year. He's tied for the 12th most pressures among edge rushers with 26. And then Will Anderson Jr. is tied for the 7th most pressures with 26. And with those guys playing at a top tier level, it's led to the Texans having the highest pressure percentage in the NFL at 43.1%. And so the Packers offensive line is definitely going to have their hands full this week. Overall, so far this year, the Packers offensive line has been, pretty good. They're about average when it comes to overall pressure percentage allowed. Lots of these stats are from NFL Pro. Some are from PFF. But they're 15th ranked in pressure percentage allowed at 32%. They do have the 3rd fewest sacks allowed at 3. So even though they've allowed an about average rate among the NFL in pressure, they have been one of the best when it comes to not allowing sacks at only 3 through 6 games this season. And PFF does have them as the highest graded pass blocking team in the NFL. But when we look at, Rasheed Walker, Zach Tom facing off against these edge rushers, it's going to be a tough task. Rasheed Walker is 61st in pressures allowed at 14. but he only has 1 sack allowed. Zach Tom is tied for 20th among tackles for pressures allowed at 6, and he has allowed only 1 sack. So Rasheed Walker, between Walker and Tom, I think has been the weaker link. He's been okay. It's not like he's been terrible, but this is a pass rush that's going to be tough to stop. Luckily, Jordan Love is very good at escaping the pocket, and so even if they can get some pressure, Love is pretty good at evading pressure. And now if we move to the other side of the ball, the Texans, of course, led by CJ Stroud, who I think is a top 10 quarterback now at this time. There's, of course, debate between CJ Stroud, Jordan Love. I personally would take Jordan Love. I bet you're shocked. But when we look at the Texans' offense so far this year, they're 14th in points per game at 23.8. They're 6th in yards per game, 11th in yards per play. So I'd say they're pretty close to a top 10 offense, around that top 10 mark there, maybe 10th best-ish offense in the NFL. And we've really started to see the Packers defense come together. And I think this past week, to me, was the most impressive game we saw from the Packers defense. Just because the Cardinals offense is pretty good. I think Kyler Murray is a very solid quarterback. They have a lot of top-tier weapons there. Marvin Harrison Jr. did go down in that game, either first or second quarter, with a concussion. And so, or at least concussion concerns. I'm not sure if he officially had one, but he definitely left the game. But to see the Packers hold them to only 13 points was pretty remarkable. And once again, the Packers continue to force turnovers at one of the highest rates in the NFL, forcing 3 fumbles against the Cardinals last week. And that is clearly a focal point. The players have talked about it. They are hunting for these footballs. And so right now, if we look at the Packers overall, they're the 9th best scoring defense in the NFL. They are 18th in yards allowed, 16th in yards per play allowed. And I would say this is definitely a better offense than the Cardinals, in my opinion. I think CJ Stroud is definitely a better quarterback than Kyler Murray. So far this year, CJ Stroud has 10 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, and he is 8th in pass yards per game. The Texans are without their best receiver in Nico Collins. I have a personal experience with this, considering Nico Collins is on my fantasy football team, and so to see him go down and placed on the IR was very painful, and obviously, I feel for him as well. And so he even missing, basically the past 2 games, he left early in 2 games ago. He's leading the Texans with 567 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns, and there's no doubt with him gone, it hurts the Texans. But last week, the Texans were still able to put up 41 points against a subpar Patriots defense. But they still have a lot of receiver talent. Stephon Diggs, of course, in Houston. Tank Dell's a really solid player as well. And so Nico Collins, he's not going to be back for a few weeks. But the Texans, because they have so many weapons, they're still able to get it done even without Nico Collins. And when we look at this Packers secondary, currently they're 25th in pass yards allowed, 19th in pass yards per play allowed. So all in all, they haven't been great against the pass. It's really been where they've been, struggled the most when it comes to run versus pass. I do think Jair Alexander coming back last week, obviously a big boost there for the Packers defense. And I've talked about it a few times on the channel, but just the decision to, put Evan Williams at safety, Packers rookie, who has been one of the best safeties so far just in his overall play. He's always around the football. Had a really nice tackle last week on I think it was a read option by Kyler Murray. I mean, this guy looks like he may be one of the steals of the draft if he keeps playing at this level. It is a super small sample size, but so far, there's honestly not much more he could have done in his playing time here, which is awesome to see. To pair that with Xavier McKinney, if it can stay like this, then the Packers are set at safety for the next 3, 4, 5 years, as long as those guys are both here. And so to see that happen, it's allowed the Packers to, I think, be overall a better defense. You put Javon Bullard in the slot, Nixon on the outside, which the Packers did a lot last week, and I really liked that grouping. They did at times, put, I think, Eric Stokes out there, but I think all in all, this defense is best in the way that they played last week with Williams out there, Bullard, and Nixon. I really like that grouping, and Jair back as well. Definitely bolstered this Packers and their secondary after not having Jair for a couple weeks, especially in that game against the Vikings against Justin Jefferson. It hurt in a big way to not have Jair Alexander. So the Packers secondary will have their hands full against CJ Stroud, who's a very talented player, and he's pretty good. I mean, he's 4 interceptions, not as bad as Jordan Love in that area, and Jordan Love, of course, has 2 less games Love does have a few more touchdowns than CJ Stroud in 2 less games, but he's been a little bit better at protecting the football. That is CJ Stroud. Now, if we look at the Texans and their rushing attack, Joe Mixon was back last week after missing a few games. And so if we look at the overall rushing stats, I don't think it's perfectly aligned with what they're going to look like on Sunday just because Mixon has missed time. But currently, the Texans are 14th in rush yards per game, 16th in rush yards per play, so about average. But Joe Mixon, when he has played so far this year in 3 games, 52 carries, 286 yards, 5.5 yards a carry. So Joe Mixon has been one of the better backs in the NFL on a per carry basis. And the Packers' running defense has honestly surprised me this year. They've been much better than in years past. Currently, they're 9th in rush yards allowed per game at 89. And they're 12th in rush yards per play allowed at 3.9. And last week, we got to see the Packers' defense against one of the best rushing attacks in the league in the Cardinals, who were like top 5 entering last week's game. And the Packers held them to 23 carries on 89 yards, only 3.9 yards a carry. Held Kyler Murray to 7 carries, only 14 yards. And so that's been an area of the Packers defense that for years and years has struggled. The run defense has always been a weak link for years in the playoffs. The 49ers, I can just have, flashbacks to them running for 200 plus yards on us, whatever year that was. Maybe happened multiple times. And so this is a good sign, an area where I'd been wondering with Jeff Hafley here, is it going to sort of switch up how this Packers run defense looks? And so far, it's been pretty good to be sitting here in the top, basically third of teams in the NFL. But Joe Mixon is a great back. It's going to be a tough task here against the Texans and the rushing attack they have here. Now, one of the Texans' biggest weaknesses is their offensive line. Currently, they're 25th when it comes to pressure percentage allowed at 37.5%, and they have allowed the 6th most sacks in the NFL at 17. The Packers' pass rush has been a big topic of discussion just because I think some of the Packers' best pass rushers are guys who are supposed to be the best guys like Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary. They just haven't really played at a top-tier level, specifically Rashawn Gary. Now, when we look at the Packers' overall, pass rush and defensive line, it hasn't been terrible. They're 14th in pressure percentage at 31.7%. They're 12th in sacks at 16. And so it could be way worse on the defensive line. I just think when you have a guy that, you're paying top-tier money like Rashawn Gary to only have 1 sack through 6 games, he's playing more like an average type player than, what the Packers paid him as. I do think he played a little bit better last week, but hopefully we'll see, that unit improve. And they have a matchup here where if they're going to take advantage, then this is a unit that hasn't been that great overall so far this season. Now, one area where the Texans are really good, tied for best in the NFL, is in their red zone offense converting touchdowns. They've converted at 75%, which is best in the NFL, tied with Baltimore. The Packers' red zone defense is 20th in the NFL, allowing conversions at 57.14%. And so, the Texans haven't really been able to be stopped much in the red zone. The Packers' defense hasn't been great in the red zone. So hopefully, let's just hope that the Texans don't get to the red zone. But that's an area of the Packers' defense that needs to take some steps forward. Now, I'd say the biggest change this year and the biggest strength of the Packers' defense has been their ability to force takeaways, which we've talked about time and time again because it continues to happen, which is awesome. But right now, the Packers have the most takeaways in the league at 2.8 per game, and the 3rd most interceptions at 9. Xavier McKinney, of course, has 5 interceptions. He wasn't able to keep his streak alive last week, unfortunately. But, it's not like you can expect a guy to get an interception every single game, even though that's how he started the season. And so CJ Stroud is a guy who, doesn't turn the ball over a ton. 4 interceptions, not too bad. Hopefully the Packers have a few opportunities here, and hopefully they can, come away with it. And honestly, just to see the Packers, even when it comes to forcing fumbles, like clearly it's being taught in that room and it's being very much emphasized to, punch at that football, try to get it out, and it's worked time and time again. And if this keeps, up at this level with the way this Packers offense is playing, then this Packers team is a pretty dangerous team. And sitting at 4-2, I really do like where the Packers are at right now. Now my score prediction is going to be at Lambeau Field, which does give the Packers an advantage. I'm going to say the Packers win this game 34-24. I don't think this offense is going to stop rolling like they are. I just think they're too talented, and I think the Packers defense can, get a few crucial stops that will allow this Packers team to get another win and be sitting at 5-2. No doubt this is a very good Texans team. It should be a very exciting, very fun matchup. If you want more Packers content, you can follow me on Twitter at LukeBeller3 if you want to get updates during the game, at least my thoughts during the game. And feel free to subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with all things Packers. But thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.